everyone, my name is Elaine, also known as the Panda from King's Entertainment Reviews, and today I'm going to be reviewing Leigh Bardugo's Grisha trilogy, sometimes it's also referred to as the Shadow and Bone Trilogy, and I'm going to start off with Shadow and Bone, which is the first book in the series. At the beginning of the novel, we're introduced to Alina Starkov, an orphan who later grows up to become a soldier. She's worried that she's not going to survive her first journey across the Shadowfold, which is basically this huge cloud of darkness that cuts across the land. It's where a lot of unnatural, evil creatures live, things that like to feast on humans. When she makes her journey, her regiment is attacked, and Alina unleashes a power she didn't know she had in order to protect everybody on the boat. Alina's actions attract the attention of the Darkling, which is the leader of the Grisha. They're essentially Ravka's magical military elite. And she's basically instantly thrown into a underworld, a very lavish lifestyle where she lives like a queen in the little palace. She's surrounded by court, politics, intrigue, the king and queen, and of course the other Grisha she begins to train with. While she's training, she falls under the spell of the Darkling. He essentially wants her around because he believes that she can use her power in order to help Ravka, helping him destroy the Shadowfold so that their war-ravaged country can be reunited and peace can be brought back to the land. But again, this could only be possible if Alina figures out how to use her power properly. Over time, Alina begins to discover more about herself. At the same time, she begins to gain more and more control over her powers. As this happens, she realizes that her life is in danger, those that she loves are in danger, and Ravka is in danger. And the book really tries to answer the question, can Alina rise to this challenge? Can she stop all of these threats? Can she keep everybody safe? I liked Bardugo's novel for a few different reasons. First, it was extremely fast-paced. There was always something going on. I feel like a lot of this stems from the fact that this is a YA novel, and a fast-paced plot is a characteristic of YA. Second, I enjoyed the world that Bardugo built and the magic that surrounded it, particularly the way that she described things like buildings, like the setting, the world overall as a whole, the way it functioned, even though there were some concerning elements like people wanting to segregate the different types of Grisha factions. I also enjoyed the magic. I didn't think it was the most original. I'd definitely seen a lot of this kind of stuff before. Healers, elementalists, that sort of thing. But I like the way she described it, and I also appreciated the fact that she included summoners of both light and dark, because that's not always something that you see in magic systems or in fantasy novels. Third, I appreciated Alina's relationship with Mal. I felt like it was an accurate depiction of jealousy, love, and friendship, a mixture of the ups and downs, which are naturally found in deep, supportive relationships. I feel like I liked this relationship a lot because I've read books where certain situations I feel like should have added strain to a relationship and they don't, or there's just so much going on and there's so much strain placed on a relationship that it seems unrealistic. I felt like there was just the right amount of strain on this relationship for them to overcome together to strengthen the relationship as a whole. And that was really nice to see. I felt like it was very accurate and I think it was a lovely relationship and I was very happy that it was present. Finally, I appreciated the fact that each character had its own distinct personality and motivations. I say this a lot. I'm sure I'll say it a lot more. I've read a lot of books where the characters all seem like the same person and it's very boring, or they don't have distinct personalities and I don't know who they are or why they're doing what they're doing or why they're saying what they're saying. And that's definitely not the case here. I think there were some characters, mainly the minor ones, that were a little more static and didn't have as much going on, but they're minor characters, so you expect that. Whereas the more major characters, like Alina, the Darkling, had more fleshed out personalities, motivations that were very, very clear that fit with their personality. So I was very, very happy to see that here. With that being said, there were a few things which I didn't like about the novel. First, I didn't feel as though the combat scenes were particularly detailed, and I would have enjoyed more description during these scenes. I feel like this is basically just personal preference. I really like detailed prose, things that let me know exactly what's going on at all times, especially during combat, which I feel like can be very disorienting if it's not done right. Second, I found Alina difficult to like. She's whiny and initially refuses to think of herself as a sun summoner. She's also extremely jealous, frustrated by both Mal's flirtatious nature and the girls that catch his eye. She complains constantly about everything, ranging from her lack of appetite to her appearance. Her lack of self-confidence grows extremely wearing, but also makes her relatable to Bardugo's readers because a lot of people don't have a lot of self-confidence, unfortunately. Her sense that she doesn't fit in with the other Grisha makes her relatable as well because a lot of people struggle with the sense that they don't belong, at least in certain social situations and within certain groups. But her line of reasoning drove me nuts. The main reason why she's convinced she doesn't fit in is because of her appearance, because a lot of the Grisha are really, really attractive, and at the beginning of the novel, She had a bit of a rundown, mousy kind of appearance, like her skin wasn't perfect, her hair was a little messy, those sorts of things. Alina doesn't seem to believe that her lack of connection to the other Grisha stems from her unwillingness to make any effort to fit in with them. For example, for the vast majority of the time she spends at the Little Palace, she makes excuses to skip practice with the other Summoner Grisha, since she can't call her gift at the beginning of the book. Then abruptly, when she begins to gain control of her gift, everything changes. She still doesn't feel like she fits in, but Alina begins to make more of an effort to spend time with the other Grisha. I didn't like this abrupt change. It felt like it was just too much too soon, almost forced. I think something a little more gradual would have made a little more sense instead of something that was like an overnight snap, I'm a new person now. I also felt as though the novel's prose was a bit weak. Ultimately, I feel as though this stems from the fact that this is Bardugo's first novel. She hasn't really had the chance to master her craft yet, and I think as she writes more and more, and I've seen this too because I read Wonder Woman Warbringer, which is one of her most recent books, her prose gets stronger and her books get stronger. Furthermore, Alina's attraction to the Darkling seems to come out of left field. We know that he tries to seduce her because he wants her to do whatever he wants, and he's trying to manipulate her. But the intensity of Alina's response seems unnatural. They barely know each other or talk to one another. They don't have much in common other than the fact that their powers set them apart from the other Grisha and from society as a whole. There's basically no basis for her feelings, so I wish this wasn't forced into the novel, and I very much feel like this was forced into the novel. It seems like it was thrown in basically to complicate her relationship with Mal and for no other reason whatsoever, and that really bugged me. I really hate forced romance. I feel like it's something a lot of authors feel like they have to include, and it drives me absolutely nuts. I also felt like the novel was fairly predictable at times. For example, obviously the Darkling wasn't going to be merciful toward Alina. He was never established as a character with a merciful history. He was not described as a merciful person. So when he wasn't, I was like, well, duh. And I knew exactly how he was going to act, and that really bothered me. This wasn't even the only plot point that I was able to predict that was fairly major, or even just plain major, and it really bugged me. I like to be surprised, and that was not the case here. Finally, I feel as though the only reason why the novel was turned into a series was because Mal and Alina failed to do what was needed. For example, Mal fails to keep his promise to Alina at the end of the novel when the Darkling finds them, and kill her to end the threat that she poses to the world. Another example would be that Alina failed to kill the Darkling at the end of the novel, definitively. She thinks she killed him, but we're not sure. And that allows for another novel. Obviously, if she did definitively kill him, she would probably have to destroy the fold. She could have done that with her powers. That could have wrapped up the series. That would have been it. It feels like the series was forced into these books and it didn't need to be there. And I'm not really complaining because I'm not interested in this series. I'm looking forward to reading the other books. Leigh Bardugo puts out good books. I'm, excited for that. But in this case, it was just like, oh, you just did that for money. Ultimately, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars because of some of the issues I discussed, such as the combat not being detailed enough for me, a really frustrating protagonist, Alina, and things like forced romance. I am going to report on my opinion of these books as I read them. I haven't gotten to the next novel yet, if that's not apparent, but in a moment, I will be back and I will give you my review. Throughout the course of Shadow and Bone, we see the development of Alina's sun-summoning powers, and this continues into the second novel of the series, Siege and Storm. Unfortunately, Alina's powers exact a price. She is a hunted individual. She's even hunted across this true sea, and she's haunted by the lives that she took on the Shadowfold with the Darkling in the first novel. Furthermore, she and Mal can't outrun her enemies forever. Eventually, she is caught by the Darkling, who is more determined than ever to claim her and her powers and use them for his own means. Because she has nowhere else to turn, she is forced to adopt new allies, an infamous privateer, and eventually the Grisha that the Darkling left behind, because she needs them to help her not only escape from the Darkling's clutches, but to fight him and eventually overcome him. As the novel progresses, we see Alina's destiny unfold. She slips farther and farther into the Darkling's clutches in a way. We see her get pulled into the elaborate game he's created to basically capture and gain control of her power. And as this happens, we also see her lose touch with herself. She begins to slip farther and farther away from her humanity. In order to save Ravka, Alina has to make a choice. Will she choose to hold on to her love, especially her love for Mal and her humanity, or will she make a sacrifice and give this up for the betterment of the country and for her people? Siege and Storm definitely wasn't as strong as Shadow and Bone, and I felt like that was because Bardugo undid a lot of her hard work, everything that made the first novel in the series strong. First, the novel did remain fast-paced, but the plot definitely didn't unravel as rapidly as Shadow and Bone, and that bothered me a little bit. I felt like Shadow and Bone had a very nice pace, and it went at a nice clip, and I would have liked to see that maintained here. Second, Alina's whiny nature continued to dominate this novel's pages. She complained about the taste of food, her appearance, and more, and it was honestly ridiculously irritating. With that being said, Alina's character did develop throughout the course of the novel, which was kind of exciting. But then again, when you think about it, it wasn't in a good way, so maybe not so exciting. Alina developed what I'm going to refer to as an unpleasant damsel in distress complex, in which she complained constantly about the fact that she had insufficient support to attain her goals. For example, in the beginning of the novel, she is captured by the Darkling. She and Mal are his prisoners on a ship, and he's surrounded by his supporters as well as a privateer and his crew. And Alina asks them to help her, being the privateer and his crew, and they don't, and she whines about it, and it's really irritating. She also complains about how she stands no chance against the Darkling and should have been allowed to die so that she wouldn't have to suffer the pain of living. She also became unpleasantly greedy. In the first quarter of the novel, Alina relates how she felt the collar at her throat, the pressure of the fetter at her wrist, while her other arm felt naked. She was incomplete, and that's on page 105. Alina becomes obsessed with the idea of obtaining another amplifier and is willing to make great sacrifices in order to obtain what she wants. She even considers giving up Mal, which is shocking considering how much she cares about Mal. This also stands in sharp contrast to her previous position in which she worried about having a second amplifier. And mind you, this transition happens within the span of about 40 pages, and it's very, very jarring. She was so determined not to have a second amplifier because everything that she read had told her, no, you can't do that, you can only have one. And then all of a sudden she's like, ooh, more power, shiny, I want it. She also becomes convinced that she should lead the Grisha even though she basically has no experience and there's no precedent for her to lead the Grisha because they've always been led by a Darkling, or in this case, the Darkling, there's only one. And eventually she does lead them. No favoritism there. She also decides that she wants more power and feels more and more intoxicated by the use of her powers. It's basically like she's become a teenage hormonal mini Darkling who summons light. Honestly, it really bothers me that Alina is the main character. I don't understand why we have such an unlikable, whiny, self-absorbed bitch for a protagonist. She also fails to set a good example for Bardugo's readers. She's both suicidal and depressed and doesn't seem to make much of an effort to overcome these feelings. I want to take a moment to make it clear that I have nothing against characters who are depressed or who have suicidal ideations, especially when we consider the fact that there are people within our society who do have suicidal ideations and who are depressed. My problem is that this novel is directed toward an adolescent audience. And this time in life is when a lot of people do get depressed and they potentially do have suicidal ideations. They do potentially also commit suicide. Because there's just so much going on at this point during your life. You're going through puberty, you're probably transitioning from middle to high school, and then again from high school to college if you go off to college, or you're getting your first job. You're probably experiencing some deaths in the family. There's a lot of hormonal stuff going on, just interpersonal drama. There's a lot of stuff going on, and there are a lot of reasons why people get depressed. And it's good to see this kind of character in literature because people can use it as a sort of guideline to maybe find new ways that they can help, themselves get over these problems. But I don't see that here. I don't even see a thread of positivity where a reader could use this to help themselves, or where a reader could use this to make themselves feel better, or where a reader could really effectively even explore these feelings, just begin to understand them more. There's just no positive side to this, and I feel like that very much needs to be there. Not only because of who this is aimed toward, but because I think in literature you need a bit of that. Obviously, there are novels where characters commit suicide and we've watched people, learn to deal with the loss and learn to cope. And again, Alina doesn't commit suicide, so that's not really relevant here. But when we see her talk about her feelings, we don't see her try to think differently or try to think around it or reach out for people. She just describes feeling alone all the time and miserable. And she complains and she complains and she complains. And I really just want there to be a little bit of positivity. Maybe that's not realistic because not all of these situations work out. People suffer from depression for years and years sometimes. They don't always overcome it, but I think it really needs to be there for this age bracket, just to make the book a little lighter, to make it a little better. And also because I think even if you don't see it yourself, there's always something positive. There's always something going for you. And for her to not see anything, or for us to be able to see anything from, how she's describing her life, was just a little ridiculous and unrealistic. If it's not clear, I think it would have been better to see her make more of an effort instead of making a weak promise, basically in the novel's final line. Like, literally, last thing Bardugo wrote. Final line. That's it. There needed to be more. Period. Furthermore, Mal and Alina's relationship took a nosedive. It became positively unbearable. Mal becomes exceedingly jealous of anyone who's even remotely interested in Alina, and hates having to share her. Alina, as I mentioned previously, has become selfish and self-absorbed. She expects Mal to follow her and go along with her agenda without giving his interests any consideration. She completely disregards his feelings and places unnecessary strain on their relationship because she's convinced the world should revolve around her and her needs because she's the chosen one. Huzzah! Ultimately, the amount of drama surrounding these two was beyond ridiculous, and getting through their chapters was a slog at times instead of being a delight like in the first novel. I honestly couldn't wait for them to kiss and make up and go back to the awesomeness that was their relationship in Shadow and Bone. The novel also became redundant, often repeating ideas and phrases over and over again, just beating them into your head until you wanted to scream. An example would be that the age of Grisha power is coming to an end, which is found on page 296. Furthermore, there were more grammatical and spelling errors in this novel than the previous, which really, really bothered me. It's called editing people. It's a magical thing. You edit stuff, get rid of those things. Very nice. Finally, I didn't feel as though Bardugo spent enough time expanding upon the world she had created in Shadow and Bone, and would have liked to see it develop further. With that being said, there were a few things which I liked about this novel. First, I enjoyed many of the new characters that Bardugo introduced in Siege and Storm, like the twins Tamar and Tolia. I appreciated how they provided a balance for one another. I also enjoyed Nikolai's playful personality and his ability to become what he needed at will, like a chameleon. He honestly reminded me a lot of a very gifted actor, someone who can slip in and out of different skins, different personalities, different personas, and just become what he needed so that he could gain the most of the situation. They honestly saved the novel from disaster. Second, I felt as though the novel contained a lot of interesting twists and turns which kept me invested in its pages, because if these weren't here and these characters weren't here, I probably would have put this down. This was definitely a lot more of a train wreck than the first novel in the series. Ultimately, I rated this a 3 out of 5 stars because of the issues I discussed earlier, with Alina just not being a likable character, being very whiny, complaining all the time, having that damsel in distress complex, not really taking care of her relationship with Mal, not doing anything to keep it alive, just putting unnecessary strain on this relationship that was so pleasant to read in the first novel. Lots of grammatical errors, really need some editing on this one. Stuff like that. The only redeeming thing, and the only reason why, like I said, I gave this book such a high rating, was because of the new characters and the twist and turn. And again, I don't even know if this deserves a 3 out of 5. I might be slightly generous in this. I really got to search my feelings there. And now, for the conclusion to this series. Ruin and Rising picks up right where Siege and Storm left off. We're introduced to a lot of the characters from the previous novel, mainly Alina, the Sun Summoner, who was injured in the previous novel, the disgraced tracker Mal, who deserted from the army, and then the Grisha, who chose to follow Alina and Mal. So people like Zoya and David and Genya. We're also introduced again to the Darkling, who rules from his throne in Ravka now that he's taken over, while Alina is forced to retreat underground and recover. She's in the White Cathedral that the Apparat rules, where all of her followers are, people who view her as a saint, and she's basically questioning whether or not it's safe for her to be here. She isn't sure if their zealotry is actually dangerous and not really helpful for her. Her hopes lie in finding the third amplifier, so she'll have enough power to overcome the Darkling, and the chance that Nikolai Lantsov, also known as Sturmhond, the privateer, still lives. As her allies and enemies race toward war, Alina comes to realize that she's the only thing that stands between her country, so Ravka, and the rising tide of darkness that threatens to destroy the world, aka the great power that's possessed by the Darkling. To win, she knows that she has to get this amplifier, but she doesn't know if claiming it will be her ruin. Ruin and Rising was definitely an improvement over Siege and Storm. It was fast-paced, although it was marked by scattered lulls, mainly due to travel. There was a lot of travel going on here, a lot of just looking for the Firebird, and it was very, very dull. It also contained fewer grammatical and spelling errors than the previous 2 novels, which I really appreciated because those things bog down the prose, make it harder to get through, make it harder to read the book, and just quite frankly, really bug me. It's called editors, people. That's what they're for. They edit stuff. Ruin and Rising was also lighter than the previous 2 novels in the series, although it still contains several darker elements because of the playful banter that took place between its characters, such as Alina and Nikolai and Alina and Mal. I felt like Ruin and Rising was humorous at times because of these exchanges, which really helped me to get through its darker periods. I know I said a lot of negative things about Siege and Storm, and that was mainly because there were just too many dark elements. I know this is a dark fantasy, and they're supposed to be there, and Bardugo really stuck to what she was aiming for, and that's great. But having a light thread here and there makes it easier to get through. It's too depressing to read sometimes. You just need that light in there, and that was here in this novel, and that was great. It was also really, really nice to see, just because these were not elements which truly bled into the pages of the previous novels. And like I said, I just like that. I need a little bit of light in my life. I need to laugh a bit. In the previous novels, I really wasn't doing that. And now and again, when I was reading this, I definitely cracked a smile. Finally, Ruin and Rising contained a lot of interesting twists and turns, although some of them were fairly predictable, such as the fact that Bagra was Ilya Morozovan's daughter. With that being said, there were a few things which I did not appreciate about this novel. First, Alina's frustrating nature continued to dominate a fair portion of its pages. She complained constantly about the cold, her sense of isolation, her fears for the future, and more. She also remained selfish and was obsessed with finding the third amplifier, despite the fact that its use comes with potential risks, such as sharp, negative shifts within her personality and just losing her sense of self, just not being a being of the light anymore, becoming darker and closer to the Darkling, which throughout the series she's more or less been trying to fight. Second, I felt as though the novel recapped what had happened previously in the series far too frequently, especially during the beginning. An example would be how Alina bested the Darkling in the previous novel and just repeating basic ideas about the Grisha power, the Darkling just not being a pleasant figure, being, bad, the fact that he and Alina were the only 2 people that were alike or could ever be alike. Just basic things that I really did not need repeated as often as they were repeated. Finally, I tired of what I felt was a repeated pattern of events. For example, at the beginning of the novel, Alina mopes because she is isolated from her peers and stuck underground with the Apparat in the White Cathedral where she can't use her powers. This is similar to her feelings in Siege and Storm as well as Shadow and Bone, since she does not feel as though she fits in with the other Grisha or has any friends. This is also similar in the sense that in Shadow and Bone she couldn't use her powers for a really long time. Furthermore, Alina is later captured by Luchenko and his team. This is similar to the previous 2 novels in which Alina is taken captive by the Darkling. I would have liked to see more marked change in the plot as opposed to similar veins throughout the series. I think it would have made for a more interesting series instead of seeing things repeated over and over. I felt like I would have been more surprised by the twists and turns and more engrossed in the series as a whole. Ultimately, I gave Ruin and Rising a 3.3 out of 5 stars. I think it was definitely stronger than Siege and Storm, but not as strong as Shadow and Bone. I think that's because this book didn't have as many grammatical errors to slow down the prose. It was fast-paced, but it did have its slow moments. But I think what really, really helped was the fact that the characters continued developing, and that was mainly through the playful banter, which I mentioned, which made the novel humorous and more enjoyable for me. I really think that we needed that light thread in such a dark series where everything just seemed to be going wrong all the time. And again, I couldn't like this book as much as I would have liked just because Alina was so freaking annoying. If she had not been so frustrating, I think I would have liked it a lot more. And again, if there wasn't so much recap and just this recurrent set of ideas, I think I would have liked it more. I would say that the series was a fairly strong series. It definitely wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. I'd give it a pretty average 3.5 out of 5 stars as a set. And that's just because, Alina was annoying. It was fast-paced for the most part, but there were those slow patches. There was a lot of recap. There were a fair amount of grammatical errors for books of this length. And just the relationship seemed a bit off. I think at first Mal's relationship with Alina was just beautiful to see. I think it was very well balanced when they had their ups and downs, but then it just went downhill, just took an absolute nosedive in Siege and Storm, and then began to improve in the final novel. And it ended nicely. I think that Ruin and Rising wrapped up the series really well. I think that Bardugo's world was very nice. I would have, liked to see a little more explanation of their magic, not magic system. Just personal preference there. I know there's a hereditary element, but that's basically all I know. But I really don't have much to say about it other than why on earth would you choose Alina as your main character? That was not a good decision. Thanks everybody for coming with me on this journey through the Grishaverse, and for listening to my review on Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone Trilogy. If you liked what you heard here today, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, hit that notification bell so you know what's up. If you'd like your own copy of one of the books in the series, or even the entire series, check out the links in the description. The books come at no extra cost to you, and it really helps out the channel. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Happy reading, everyone.